Okay, what we're going to do next is we're going to look at some data on the older adults. So we've got some of the data that's in the textbook and then some other stuff to look at too. So first off, I want to look at cohabitation here. And so the book talked a lot about this. They had a big section about this. So that older adults, and in particular this chart here, is looking at older adults ages 50 and above. So it says they had the highest percentage increase in cohabitation between 2007 and 2016. And so why is this the case? So when we look at this data here, we see clearly that like this youngest age group, they have higher rates of cohabitation. But when we look particularly at the rate of change, we see here the percentage increase of older adults is a bigger jump. It increased by 75%. So why is this the case? And so the textbook talks about these ideas. I just want to reinforce them here. That more people than ever before are entering this stage of life single. They are single and ready to cohabit due to either getting divorced or never getting married. Again, the younger, when these folks were younger, they were more likely to have cohabited than generations previous, and so it's they're used to it. It's an accepted idea, and so they don't think it's taboo. So they're more likely to engage in it. And also it's pretty common in general to cohabit now, and so it's part of our cultural ideas about life and about companionship. Like I said before too, they have different reasons than those who are younger, and especially in terms of it being a precursor to marriage. For older adults, they are not likely to say that cohabitation is something that they're going to do before they get married. Rather, it's a long-term alternative. So we have a family member who is divorced, her kids are grown, and then she has a boyfriend now, but he's and she doesn't plan to ever marry him, but they've been living together for a long time. She just doesn't want to get married again, but she does want to have a relationship, a love in her life. And then a lot of the reasons why cohabitation works better as an alternative for the older folks, better than marriage for them, has to do with finances. They're protecting their assets. They might not be able to get their former spouse's Social Security or pension if they remarry, and then not marrying ensures that their assets will go to their kids or grandkids rather than the kids of their new spouse. And this is really complex. Obviously, it's not a clear-cut thing, and obviously different folks are going to want to do different things, and they might have different beliefs about marriage. And so this is not, it's not a cut and dry issue. I'm not trying to make that claim. So then the next piece of data I want to look about has to do with divorce. So here's a couple of charts looking at divorce. And so here we know this from reading about divorce too, that overall divorce has declined in the past. What would that be, 40 years, since the 1980s, divorce has been declining. But the divorce rate among those who are 50 and older, so again, if you're looking here at this older generation, we can see that they have those rates have increased in that age group. And so here we see that the decline of divorce rates for the youngest group, a very slight increase for those in their 40s, and then a huge jump for those in their 50s. And so why might this be the case? Why might it be the case that the divorce rate for people 50 and up is so much higher? So one reason is that people who are ages 50 and older, they're more likely to be remarried, and we know that remarriages are less stable in terms of likelihood of divorce than first marriages, and so that is one reason why we see more increases in divorce in that category. The risk of divorce is also higher for people who are age 50 and up, who have been married a shorter amount of time. The research shows that people who are later in life, experiencing later life divorces, they've become unsatisfied with their marriages and they're really looking for independence. And so that may be a reason that it is different among that age group than in younger age groups. All right, the next piece of data that we're going to look about has to do with grandparents and grandchildren. So here we're looking at some data of grandchildren living with and cared for primarily by grandparents. And we're seeing that number is rising and then leveling off. And in particular, we should note the impact of the economic downturn in 2008. And so obviously this we don't have data from right now. It'll take a while to get good 2020 data. But I would propose that we might see some similar things happening now, that with the economic crises happening because of coronavirus, that we might again see some of these households becoming composed of multi-generational families because of the need to care for one another. Maybe grandparents caring for grandchildren while the parents are out at work. Maybe people just not being able to afford living together. So in this data in particular, 71% of kids living with a grandparent are actually living in the grandparent's home. So sometimes when we think about grandparents, we think about them being cared for by their children or their grandchildren. But actually, when we look overall, it's more likely that the grandparents, like the younger folks, have moved into the grandparents' home. Remember the more economic stability among older people, and they're the ones who are actually doing a lot of the care work. And so when we think about the reasons that a family might need a grandparent's assistant, I've got a list here. And so the reasons why, like I think grandparent and then parent and grandchild, if we think about why that parent and grandchild might need the grandparent's help. One reason is if someone has a baby as a teenager, when they themselves are a teenager, they might need more assistance because they can't live on their own, because they're young, because they can't work, because they need childcare. Folks who have a disability are more likely to need that care from a grandparent. Folks who are facing unemployment, they don't have a job, they don't have financial independence, so they need help from the grandparent. Folks without a high school diploma, so they're have less education, which means that they have less economic prospects, so harder to get a good paying job, might need that financial assistance. Or they might be currently enrolled in school, they need help with childcare, they have less money because they're enrolled in school, maybe they're not working. So these are reasons that folks might need the grandparent assistance. And then the last point here that the chapter really didn't talk about was talking about employment. And so now if we look at the data, more older Americans are working than in previous decades. So if you look at that bottom greenish line there, the population ages 65 and up has gone from closer to 10% up to 18%. From 2000 to 2016. And there are differences within this group. So in terms of gender, males are slightly more than 50% of the older workforce. So it's more likely that men are working than men than women, just slightly. And then there's differences by race as well. So older white and older Asian folks are slightly more likely to be working than older Black folks. And I don't know why my percentage didn't get in this at 16.7% in the of Black folks. I think that's in the PowerPoint that I'm uploading for you all. And so employment has changed over time. Folks continuing to be in the workforce or maybe going back into the workforce as well. All right, this is the end of part 2, and so the part 3 video contains instructions for the participation activity.